All right. So just as always, we are on time, as per court or as part of the course. We're late. We were supposed to start at 11:20. We delayed.
Why do you do this to us, man?
I do it just for you guys on purpose. No, either way. So I think the name of the stream is self-explanatory. Politics of Middle Earth. The reason I wanted to do this is kind of tongue in cheek. Kind of like I mean, this episode is not, but
because you're a fucking ultra nerd. That's why you wanted to do this.
Well, I purposefully decided
this
to do it
stream's
this
supposed
weekend.
to be about the politics of Middle Earth. I thought we were bitching.
No, it's the politics of Middle Earth specifically.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
That's terrible. Can't we just talk about Middle Earth?
You lied.
Why can't we just talk about Middle Earth? I thought we were going to be complaining about the postmodern Rings of Power that just came out.
I didn't watch that shit.
I
don't think any of us watched it.
No hate watching.
I'm not even going to hate watch it. Yeah.
No, the reason we're streaming tonight though is because we're competing with the viewership. We need to make sure that Amazon gets as few views as humanely possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, because we can totally compete with Amazon.
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos is
dude, all you gotta do
I see you, Bezos. I'm gonna beat you.
Make a fucking
I'm gonna go to your house and stalk you and wear your perfume.
No, you can't.
Make a clone of the terminal list and boom, you'll beat the shit out of Amazon constantly.
Yeah, and I heard people didn't like the terminal list because
that's because they're stupid.
Yeah. But either way, yes, welcome to Political Pigpen. This is kind of going to be like the politics of Star Wars stream we did, which I would argue is nerdier than this.
I don't know about that, man.
Really?
I don't fucking know about that.
So I just want to start off as an introduction real quick. The Lord of the Rings, like at least compared to something like A Song of Ice and Fire, is not like inherently political in the same way as in politics itself is not a central theme. It deals more with like metaphysics, religion, philosophy, mythology.
Do you mean the
of
internal
course.
politics or the external politics of the reader?
Well, no. What I'm specifically referring to, we're going to be talking about the politics of Middle Earth, the themes in the book, and of course the different. Throughout the different ages, the different kingdoms there, more or less the political order of things in Middle Earth. We can specifically focus on the books. However, of course, we can draw off of the Peter Jackson movies, which, of course, very faithful adaptation to the spirit at the very least. But yeah, so. As I was saying, unlike something like A Song of Ice and Fire, politics is not at the forefront of it in the same way. However, that's not to say that there aren't inherently political aspects of it. And so I just wanted to touch on that. I was thinking we go. I don't know how long this is going to go. Hopefully, it's not going to be drawn out into 4 streams again like Star Wars. But as always, let's go ahead and do introductions. Starting with Beppis. How are you doing this evening, Beppis?
I'm alive. How are you?
I'm doing well. Go ahead and introduce yourself to those who might not know who you are.
I like to be mysterious. Let's let the viewer figure that part out.
Okay. Paleoanglism.
Hello, I'm Paleoanglism. I do politicisms and I occasionally come on here to post cringe. So.
No cringe. I'm looking so hard for that Gandalf titty picture. I'm looking so hard for it. I looked at them the other day. I was like, those are some big fucking knockers, and I can't find them anywhere. But I'm like in hot pursuit right now.
Continue with introductions. Darth Kilhoun.
Hi, I'm Darth Kilhoun. I run the Darth Kilhoun YouTube channel. I mostly do political commentary on other people's channels, and mostly just make I honor the old monarchies of old and Catholic saints, etc. And I hope to get into scripted political videos in the future.
Okay.
But
all right, Damnation.
So that takes it to me. So I'm Damnation 3. I am just here to do political cringe and nerd out a little bit. And my Twitter handle is one where I LARP as an anarchist hacker within the cyberpunk world. So, if you guys go check it out, it's pretty fucking funny.
And last and certainly least, Mrs. Ian Chicago.
Hi, I'm tired and kind of miffed.
Face.
I found the pictures I was looking for.
Shit!
If you want to look at private chat real quick, there's a few more I want to share as well. He got
Those
some
are-
big
There are
naturals. He has some fat naturals. Am I right?
Those are amazingly large
You're so
mommy
more-
milkers on
I know
fucking
he's
Gandalf.
looking great. Oh my gosh.
Oh,
here's
that's
Here's
I'm gonna have to click off that. That's absolutely horrendous.
Yeah, it
Here-
is horrendous.
Okay,
I'm
so
sorry, you don't have good taste.
Somebody's mic is fiddling around. According to that, that's what our audience is telling us. So whoever that is.
Yeah, so if someone's being ultra scratchy, and I think
I think Kilhoon's probably playing a game. So
No, I'm not. Like you're scratchy whenever I hear you.
Yeah, I think the background's coming from your talk again, JR.
hello. No,
Move around how you were before.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not me.
Are you sure?
Yeah, no, that scratching just happened again. It's coming from you, Poligrad.
Whatever. Okay.
It sounds like it's coming from you, bud.
Why is it always you?
So everybody, I mean, I know like we're gonna have fun on this stream tonight, but I just want us to take things a little serious. Just remind you, this is not a midnight stream like we had the other night. I actually want this to be a productive conversation. I just want to say that beforehand. But I think I want to start off by going around like we always do, at least in the first segments of our streams. Specifically focusing on this topic, what do you think more or less the overarching or underarching political themes are of Tolkien's Legendarium, if there are any? Again, I know it's not inherently political in the same way as something like A Song of Ice and Fire, but I just want to hear all of your guys' takes, just so we can sort of establish where we're all at with regards to the topic. Starting with Bevis.
That's an extremely loaded question. It really depends on what we're looking at, where we're looking at, and when historically we're looking at. Overall, I don't think I'd describe Tolkien's work as inherently political. I'd describe it as more values-based and philosophical. You can tell, I know Tolkien wasn't a big fan of allegory, especially in his own work. And he hated it being compared to real-world idioms, politics, and dichotomies. But you can tell that his Catholic beliefs and philosophies were prevalent throughout his written work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Paleo-Anglism?
I'm more of the opinion that Tolkien's work were more, I guess you could say, unintentionally allegorical, and I think this is something that he actually admitted in later life. It's something that it's a damnation.
God dang you.
There was. Well, I'm quickly off that. No,
Don't think about him. Don't think about him.
I put it back. I genuinely apologize.
Yeah,
Right.
please do not do that.
No,
I mean, I want this to be actually a semi-serious conversation. So
Yeah,
Oh my god.
I do. Generally speaking, I tend to find the Lord of the Rings to be more, like I said, unintentionally allegorical. Again, something that Tolkien himself admitted in later life. It's something that he did, like I said, he didn't really like allegory. He wanted to avoid, but it's something that was kind of inevitable because he was someone with a very, I guess you could say, fleshed out and structured worldview. It kind of informed everything that he had written, everything that he believed, and it was and outside of his work in like the Lord of the Rings, it was very. He was very open about what he believed. Like he would never like not so open as to like speak it out, like as to like speak it without being asked. But if he was asked, he would be very he was very firm on what he did and didn't believe. And again, whether he intended it or not, like he wasn't a C.S. Lewis figure where like the allegory is so obvious it's slapping you in the face. But it was almost, again, an unintentional allegory, one that even if he didn't like to admit it, he did have to kind of cop to in the end.
All right. Are we on to me? Or
I hope he didn't fall asleep.
Oh,
yeah, Poligrad, come on.
Don't ask us to not derail your stream, and then you do the thing like a minute later.
Yeah, you do your fall asleep at the mic thing. Okay, well, I'm just going to start talking then about Tolkien. So the way I think about Tolkien and the way I think about his politics is how the Russians think about readers. I mean, not readers, writers. They have this interpretation that a writer speaks himself through his writings, and you can see his soul through his writings. So, like when you're seeing more upbeats part of his works in the War of the Rings and in the Hobbit, you see, like especially the Shire is where he's most at peace, where he has the most joy in writing, and where you can see him clearly by the way that he writes and the way that he describes the world, that this is his idealistic world, where he describes a natural order of things, where they have natural hierarchies, they have a natural community, they have very simplistic, communal, and intertwined with the natural world and the natural order of things. And that's ultimately what Tolkien wished to convey, I think, that there is an alternative to the industrialist, modernist, and materialistic world, that you could live a fulfilling life within a more simple time period and probably a more feudal time period. In fact, I'd probably say that Tolkien was born outside of the age that he should have. He probably would have been more at home in the English medieval age than the age of World War One and into World War Two, and that period of history in England. And I just see that in his works a lot. Like I just finished The Fellowship just a couple hours ago. I was attempting to do the entire trilogy before the stream, but life got in the way, because like the last time I read it was early grade school.
Wow.
It's been a hot minute for me as well. I think I read both The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings in like 2016.
Mm-hmm. Damnation.
Yeah, I guess I'll pick it up here. So, when we're talking about the politics of Lord of the Rings, like the after the Hobbit, you can clearly tell that Tolkien was influenced by the horrors and massive amounts of destruction that happened in World War One, when he was afterwards and after, because when you look at the destruction and chaos that was caused by that war, there was a lot of people that believed that the world was ending because of that, right? Like there's this destructive evil where there's so many people dying, and it just continued on forever and ever and ever, and it just felt like to those people involved in it that it just was the greatest and most horrific war that ever happened. And that heavily influenced how he wrote Sauron and how Mordor happened and all of that. And there's like a direct throughput. Even if it wasn't his intention to do that, he was heavily influenced by the horrors he had seen in World War One. So
I'm going to push back a little bit and say he was definitely informed, obviously, by his experiences in World War One, but he remained adamant in a lot of his writings about not wanting people to take modern or allegories or even allegories from Earth itself and our reality. And he didn't like it to reflect on the fictitious world he made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like that was the entire preface before The Fellowship, was just a refutation of people who wanted to tie allegory to a story.
But I get what you're saying, that no matter what, he went through horrifically traumatic experiences, which informed his values and his world views and his outlook and the way that he then led his life after World War One. So inevitably that's going to come through in his writing and his art.
It also did inform his disdain for the industrial world and the industrial slaughter of mankind that happens because of industry in the modern age. But,
for sure. For sure.
I mean, that was like also if you read Ernst Jünger as well, like he's pretty much like the German equivalent to Tolkien and his disdain for industrial warfare.
And you can see that in some of his translations as well, as especially in Beowulf. his translation of Beowulf is very, very similar to the latter half of the Fellowship, because I know you said you just finished the Fellowship.
Hmm.
It's similar in it's not yet fully steeped in the muck how the second and third book get in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but his Beowulf translation and edit is very similar in that respect.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think what we need to do is we need to remember that he wasn't really writing fantasy in the same way that many many modern authors like George R. R. Martin or the late Robert Jordan or Brandon Sanderson write fantasy. Like he was essentially reconstructing a lost Anglo-Saxon mythology. Like, of course, it was fictitious, but he was. It's essentially a reconstructionist project in that sense, because the whole point is Anglo-Saxon England more or less lost its mythological tradition after the Norman invasions, and after the Norman invasions back in the 11th century. So that was more or less the intent of the project as a whole. So
For sure.
and we need to remember. Oh, sorry.
No, no, you finished what you were saying. I was just going to add on about his writing style.
Well, no. Yeah, actually, talk about that. I was going to talk about how it represents a sort of an ideal heroic age society, but I think we could probably.
I think in some respects it does. Some respects it does represent his idealistic society, especially within the Shire. It's obviously the Shire is a reflection of the Shires of England. Obviously, you bring up George R. R. Martin, and you can tell a lot of modern fantasy takes heavy inspiration from Lord of the Rings in every facet, but is extremely dissimilar to Lord of the Rings and other Tolkien works. Tolkien stands alone in a lot of respects, especially narratively. It's more poetic. It's more like an actual epic, the way it's structured and written, especially there's songs and poems and short stories within the works themselves, so much so to a point that it's almost more similar to Greek writings than I would say George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, which I love both works, but J.R.R. Tolkien is definitely taking inspiration from very old works when he was writing Lord of the Rings, and that doesn't fully carry through into the modern fantasy that he inspired, which I think is very interesting.
Well, I mean, modern fantasy is fundamentally escapist, while then Tolkien was not. He was not trying to escape the modern world. He may have subconsciously, but consciously that wasn't his objective with the Lord of the Rings. It was a conscientious creation of a mythology for England and greater European culture that he very much loved. Like he loved studying like the Finnish mythology, Norse mythology, German, Greek. He was a scholar of all, and I think he translated one of the Finnish mythologies into English, but he preferred still to read it in the Finnish.
Well, he was a linguistic expert, and he was very much so on the page of language. It not only informs your ability to speak and communicate with others, but it informs how your culture develops, because the way that you speak and you're able to actually communicate and work with others will proliferate through that culture and form that culture as it develops organically through time. And language is one of the largest keystones to that. And him being a linguistic professor really informs on how he ended up writing Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion and the Hobbit and all the other works in that world, because he started, like, I don't want to say autistically, but from just the bottom up of creating language first and going from there. And I think that that's a very, very cool way to write a story. Very cool way to get off the ground with that.
Yes, I think he's going to be probably the most unique writer, and his writings will probably survive for centuries to come, while then others will die. And like I think like the statistic is only the top 10% of the top 10% of artists actually see their work survive for centuries, while then the others fall to the trash bin of history within a few decades of their life.
Maybe sometimes.
Well,
But
that's
Tolkien-
typically like if you look at like classical music, that is very much the case where
Oh, it always still exists for the annals and the nerds that want to get into it. But yeah, Tolkien stands in a league of his own. Just from the skill, even if his writing style isn't the most action-packed or narratively driven in the same way that A Song of Ice and Fire or other narratives are, it is extremely unique in its own right.
I mean, A Song of Ice and Fire too is I would have to just say the cynical Gen X attempt to rewrite Tolkien.
No, I don't get that vibe from it.
I mean, I do, because it's just, I would say, one of the most cynical pieces of work that I have ever had to rest my hands upon. And I've grown I used to be inspired by Martin, but now I'm more disdainful of Martin as I've grown older.
I've only read his books. I don't know nothing about him. I don't know much about him personally. But so I suppose mine is more of a sheltered view of him. But I view his work as being somewhat inspired by Tolkien, but it's distinctly different, and he's telling a distinctly different story. I can only really compare A Song of Ice and Fire and Lord of the Rings in the sense of they're both fantasy books. They're they're so extremely different from one another. I don't even know if it's appropriate to really compare them other than just modern popularity.
I mean,
versus a extremely old-timey thing that inspired that thing. But
I mean, like,
they're so
the thing
different.
the thing about like Tolkien is he cared about the grand narratives and the philosophical impact of his work. While then Martin literally said in interviews like, "Well, what is Aragorn's tax policy?" He's that's literally like his. He was like
what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying, like, if you're going to compare and contrast the two, it's like
I guess I
s-
would be more so concerned about the actual literary things that proliferated A Song of Ice and Fire, and then talk about those in the context of Lord of the Rings. I
Yeah.
understand weird interviews outside those things to inform about an author's work, but honestly, once the work is written, the author can say whatever they want about it. It's not going to change my mind and how I interpret it.
But if the mentality going into your writing also does influence how you will write it, like that's why Tolkien wrote it in a third person omniscient. He wrote it like a grand tale, like it's like it's being told from a godlike figure or a grand storyteller in the future, not told real time, really.
No,
If you want to be really based, you would not pull.
but that's okay.
We can barely hear you, Politicrat. You there?
Dead air. No
Yeah,
dead air allowed.
JR
No dead air
dead.
allowed.
Yeah,
He died.
he's just dead.
You hear me?
JR, I think you have mic issues. You've been really low all evening.
Do you hear me?
A little
Barely.
barely though.
It sounds like you're in a fucking room.
It sounds like you're in a cave.
You sound like
What,
you're in a tunnel.
is
He's
your
in
audio
Plato's cave.
Is your audio? Is your mic? Is your mic like having issues?
Yeah, I'm going to something.
Okay, I think you might want to figure your audio out. Okay, now here's where we derail. Let's continue talking about Lord of the Rings though. Just to be a little more topical, since we are talking about A Song of Ice and Fire, and I know this isn't extremely political, but to keep in theme, has anybody seen any bit of the new Rings of Power?
No.
No, I haven't. I
Nope.
refuse to watch that show.
Me too.
Oh,
Fine.
Lord, them rangs.
I'm not even gonna hate watch it. I'm not even
No.
gonna fucking steal it
No,
to watch it.
No, same here. I know there's been a massive political narrative, like modern, disgusting, postmodern narrative concerning the Rings of Power and Lord of the Rings now being brought to the forefront. Let's do a little discussion on the modern push of the Rings of Power, trying to insert extremely modern narratives and understandings of culture and politics into a arguably very old piece written by a devout Catholic.
Okay, I think I have better connection now.
No.
No, your
It's
mic still
so
sucks.
awful. Our own host can't even be here.
But let's talk about the modern politics that are trying to be inserted into a work that's over 80 years old and was written by a man in a completely different philosophical and political headspace, and how those two things are clashing to a massive cultural point.
I said this yesterday, but this is one of the few examples where I feel completely comfortable saying that this show was created with malicious intent.
In what ways?
Yes.
And I agree with that premise. But do you mind going through what you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is that the Lord of the Rings franchise, if we're going to call it that, is extreme.
The Lord of the Rings universe.
Yeah, this is why I didn't want to say that, because it's attached with a lot of modern shit.
Yeah,
But it's it's incredibly popular in the modern day, but also a lot of its, like I said, philosophical implications are pretty much lost on the majority of fans. And
yes,
are lost on the majority of fans.
I think the biggest misgiving that the Rings of Power has so far, and I've watched people react to it. I haven't watched the entire thing myself. I don't.
And you guys have seen the reviews, right?
Correct, I
No.
have. I think the biggest misgiving is the misunderstanding, or the idea more so, that all media, all art has to be political. And I don't think that assertion is true or compelling. I think what all art is values.
Ooh,
All art in
only
some way, shape, or form will have values from that author, from that artist, that proliferate through their work, right? Knowingly or unknowingly, right? It's the person that makes that bleeds and sweats for that thing, and it will proliferate through their work.
Well, it's
Some
a gateway
works-
to the soul. Like
Of
if you
course.
read somebody's work, you are fundamentally reading into their
Yes.
soul, how they think, how they perceive the world,
Correct.
their worldview.
And
By the
some
way, also
stories-
I just looked up the Rotten Tomato, 38% audience score.
we got to bring that lower.
Yeah, we can bring it lower, everybody.
I think they've already deleted a few thousand reviews as well, from what I was reading earlier. So they're on the way for
Ooh.
that. But I think a big thing, some works can be more knowing about the values and those philosophical quandaries they're trying to push. If they're trying to especially have a message, Star Trek comes to mind, which I think especially older Star Trek was very, very good at pushing philosophical questions and making the reader think about an issue. And I think that is being co-opted by modern leftoids, if you will.
I mean, it's
co-opted
fundamentally
in that respect, and being said, well, this is political. This is all politics. Politics isn't everything. And then inserting pop culture drivel to a point of it's not consumable. It's not even fun to watch it anymore because it's so hitting you over the head. It's not even focusing on telling a story at this point. It's trying to hit you over the head and make you feel like a piece of shit for the way you were born because you're not the right person watching this show anymore.
So, I mean, I will say with like Star Trek, fundamentally the writers from back in the day and the writers today are from the same school of thought. The difference is this term called bio-Leninism, where over generations, like the founders are the top tier men. The best men are found the institution, and then over generations it degrades over time. Like you saw that, like
For sure.
the first Star Trek show, with who played
William
Kirk?
Shatner and
Yeah,
Leonard Nimoy.
Yeah, which actually Spock died on my birthday. I found out.
Condolences. I'm so sorry. I know
Yeah,
how important he was to you.
I mean, as a kid, like I was like, oh, that's sad because I did actually enjoy his acting, but like back then, like you saw a very well written, well produced show, even though it was in the '60s and they didn't have.
I think that's the biggest thing, though, is that it was focused on making a story, and it was focused on selling that world to you.
And
right?
any like philosophical points too were done very well, and
Yes.
like they were pushing a narrative, but the thing about their pushing is they're very subtle because they had subtlety in their writings, but then
Because it was
over
actually good writing.
yes, and then over time they slowly lost subtlety. Like you saw a little bit of less subtlety when Next Generation came out.
Mhm.
Then you saw a little bit less when Deep Space Nine and Voyager came out. Right, it's Voyager after Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, and now it's
Yeah.
devolved to a point where they have a January 6th-esque, like, this was the end of our planet, and we have to go back in time to save people from Donald Trump. And you're like, how topical.
And it just like degrades over time the ability to. Oh, and we lost Politicrat. But
Wonderful.
Now we get to talk about anime next.
yeah, but it's just the subtlety. Like you have like the degradation over generations in terms of writing capabilities, and that's what happens with every franchise. Tolkien was one writer. He had a singular vision, and he made that vision happen.
He made it happen in a way wherein he successfully convinced me of that world in every facet. That world became real to me when I read the books. And that's the biggest thing about, I think, fantasy and sci-fi fiction is that the goal is to sell that world as real, despite all its fantasy and sci-fi
Let me
elements.
throw this out. Go ahead, man.
So no, Domination. No, you go ahead first. I was just going to make.
I was going to ask a question that would. So you.
But
Make your
I
point.
was just going to make a tangential point on Star Trek. It was the idea that one of the redeeming qualities of even stuff like DS9, like later down the line, was the fact it sold the world on the idea that not everyone was convinced of the in-universe. Not everyone was convinced of the ideology.
Right.
Like,
I completely agree, and that's what sells it on the realism.
Yeah, it's the fact that like humans would have this very smug attitude about having a moneyless society where everyone's basic needs are taken care of, but a lot of their ideological positions, like not being able to make friendly bets with people, like there's a cold open in DS9, where basically he's trying to where a human character is trying to get a Ferengi to give him money so he can place a bet. And the Ferengi just points out, well, you're the one that's just like giving the virtues of a moneyless society all the time. So if you don't need money, then clearly you don't need mine.
Right.
Yeah.
Based Ferengi.
It was amazing.
But what were you going to say, Damnation?
So I'm going to actually comment on that. So like, I think in Deep Space Nine, the main driving thrust of the overarching narrative of that TV series was summarized in one line, and I believe it was called the episode. It was like the two-parter was like the Maquis two-parter, when the admiral that was originally part of the Federation, like a Starfleet admiral, jumped over to the Maquis, and he's talking to Cisco, and he says to him, is like, in the Federation, at the heart of Earth, it is easy to be a moral and uprighting and judgmental citizen in paradise. When you come out to the fringes like this, that moral high ground kind of devolves and degrades because there's real people in real situations with making real actions that affect their lives with other societies that interact with us that don't necessarily have that same concept for it. Right?
Almost kind of like behavioral sync. Like it's a privilege to have those views in the first place because of that sheltered society.
It's a privileged position to have, which I would say most of American politics today is a privileged positions to have.
And I think that a big thing about what you were saying, Kilhoun, about things devolving over time, especially in franchises. There's that quote by Professor Tolkien about evil. About let me look it up just real quick.
Evil only has the ability to corrupt; it doesn't have the ability to create.
Yeah, it's something along those lines. It doesn't have the ability to create; it can only corrupt what already exists. And I think that's a very good summation of where not only the Rings of Power is, but where a lot of modern mainstream art is right now.
Well, I heard this analogy, I forget where, but like the thing about like most franchises is like in the early days, like they were made by men who weren't fans of their own franchises because they were creating them. Like say George Lucas wasn't a Star Wars fan. he was a fan of history and literature and other forms of art, and he brought that into Star Wars. That's why his works were so great. And then
Star Wars is very simplistic too. It's a western basically.
I mean, no,
but then you get like
Star Wars
a
is more or less it's the hero's journey. I mean, that's all it is.
Yeah, it's very archetypical.
well, yes, but then you get to like you get to quite frankly newer shows, and it's made by Star Wars fans just for love of Star Wars, and they don't have this exterior. They don't know any other literature, or they don't apply any other literature that they know of. They don't read philosophy. They don't
It's like
understand.
a self-contained fan fiction that's devolving over time.
Like that's what I say. Like the new movies are.
And
the
new movies are horrific.
Yeah, and then you can apply that to like Star Trek, because like of course, the people writing modern Star Trek are people like, we loved like the Next Generation. We loved all this futuristic technology and stuff, but they didn't understand the deeper philosophical things like say Jean-Luc Picard would bring in whenever he had an issue to dispute. Like he would quote, like looking back at Next Generation, I mean, I could see like him quoting like philosophers like Aristotle and Plato into the script and applying those virtues in it. But then in the modern writings like Discovery and stuff, like they have no background like that.
That's completely void, and I think you're right on the money. Because look at the Halo movie the Halo television show that recently came out, and what the writers and producers were saying when they were asked if they enjoyed Halo, if they've ever played the games or read any of the books. Nope. I've never played a game.
Mm-hmm.
I've watched maybe 1 or 2 lore videos on YouTube. And you're like, it reflects in your work.
Yep. Yeah. But then also like the writers of Halo also like understood other forms of literature as well.
The original, not the TV show guys.
Yeah, like the makers of the game like understood what made a good story.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like even if you don't end up agreeing with the specific politics of the writer at hand, if they're out to write a good story, it will reflect. If they have the talent for it and they know how to execute it, it will reflect in their work. And I think that you can see that with a lot of pulp fiction. That I'm not a personal fan of a lot of different writers, but when it's good, it's good. You know, when it's good, it's good.
Well, it's like to kind of jump on the Halo bit. Well, one of the major themes of at least the original Halo trilogy was kind of like human excellence and human perseverance against overwhelming odds, and one of the big one of the big plot points of the original Halo trilogy is that humanity's losing the war against the Covenant.
Yes.
Like, even with the Spartans, they are losing. And, like, they only win by the skin of their teeth. And I think it's like something like 60% of the human race is wiped out by the end of the war.
Yes, that is true. And then you get to like 4, and it's like humanity's on top, and it's like destroys the narrative.
Yeah, humanity's on top, and actually, secretly, humanity were assholes the whole time, and most of them aren't very likable.
So to get back to Lord of the Rings, though, specifically, well, actually, first, Chicago never said anything specifically. I mean, I know Damnation and Beppes, you had your little back and forth after that, but Chicago never specifically said more or less what his interpretation is on the relationship between Lord of the Rings and politics, and whether he thinks there's any deeper political themes or what they are. So I kind of want to hear what he has to say about that before we continue with this particular conversation.
I mean, I don't really think that there's much correlation between politics and the Lord of the Rings, because, well, that's not what Tolkien wrote, and it's very evident
I agree
that Tolkien did not write that. Please do not talk over me, by the way.
I'm just saying I agree with that.
Yeah, and I don't want you to talk over me regardless. Continuing on, I think he wrote more The Lord of the Rings not on politics but on religion, because he keeps on invoking, God, really. When you actually read it, like, Iluvatar is just a Christian god. So, even though he doesn't like allegory, I do think that it's somewhat an allegory to the Bible, and that's why I enjoyed The Lord of the Rings a lot more than modern fantasy.
Yes, I mean the Catholic social teaching is stark in the Lord of the Rings, very much so, and I mean, it was funny, like in Tolkien's own personal life, when Vatican II happened and they went to using the Vulgate in masses, he would purposely speak over everyone else in the Latin because he was so well astute in Catholic theology and he spoke Latin. So he refused to pray in English. He would only pray in Latin.
What an
Actually,
actual Chad,
that's
and this is
interesting.
coming from an Anabaptist.
Yeah.
My sound is better now, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
you're much
Yeah.
louder
Yeah.
now.
Okay.
It's normal now.
One of my favorite stories from Tolkien specifically is his relationship with C.S. Lewis, because C.S. Lewis was an Anglican, and what would like C of E and he was like he accredited Tolkien for bringing him back to Christianity, and Tolkien was very happy about this, but he was also incredibly annoyed that he became C of E and not Catholic.
I love Tolkien. But yes, it's very much he does advocate. I kind of say he advocates for like the Gibelline worldview, even if like subconsciously. Which, by the way, in Gibellinism was the advocacy for the divinely appointed monarchy of Christendom. That's what you see in Aragorn as a character, as the ideal king of Middle Earth, as the king of kings.
Let's start talking about how Tolkien. Let's move on from there to talk about how Tolkien more or less depicts sort of the socio-political makeup of Middle Earth. I mean, I say it's probably best to just start by discussing the Third Age in that specific context. But it definitely is a very pro-monarchist work. I mean, not in the sense that it's because, of course, we've all established it's not an inherently political work, but in terms of its overall overarching metaphysical themes, the entire message, or not the entire message, but the entire sort of premise, underlying theme is a restoration of the natural order, a restoration of the proper way of things, a return of the king, like just the very title of that the implication is in the title. It's about returning to the natural order, and in the traditional sense, that would be a monarchical society.
I don't
Yeah,
I don't get Reformation or returning to the archetypal society from Return of the King or from a lot of Tolkien's themes. I think a lot of what Tolkien wrote was a descriptor of how things are long dead and gone, and they'll always be gone forever, and you can't change things, and there will always be new things. And I think that's exemplified especially once Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin leave the Shire for the first time, and they're walking through the wastes with Aragorn Strider at the time to Rivendell, and they're going through basically the ruins of old kingdoms, and it's described how even the grass and the trees and the plants themselves remember the elves that used to live there, but those elves are long gone and forever gone. And I don't see that as a reformation. I see it as a progress moving forward.
well, I mean, Tolkien wrote that because he understood, like, that's why he had the different ages. Like, you could kind of say, like, the first age was the age of the gods, the second age was the age of heroes, and the third age is the Kali Yuga, the age of the weak. That's why you see all the ruins, you see the destruction,
Yes.
and you see a degradation of the natural order. And at the fourth age,
Well, I think I see that more of a signifier of change. Of
well,
how even if things will get better, and they obviously do when Sauron is defeated and Aragorn takes the throne, I see that more of a history not repeating so much as perhaps rhyming, as Mark
Well,
Twain
yeah.
said, in the
Well,
sense of it's
it's
changed,
not
and
not
they'll never
repeating,
be
but
able
it's
to return to what was once the grandeur of prior ages.
well,
We also
it's
need
not
to
about
remember that
history
Tolkien was
repeating.
essentially, he was writing a mythology, and one of the core underlying themes that ties together all mythological traditions is the declining ages. You see that in Hinduism, you see that in ancient Greece, you see that in ancient Rome, you even see that in Christianity, albeit in a more subtle sort of way, like the fall of
because
the
declination
natural
is
order from sort of a golden age into a silver age, into a bronze age, into a dark age. And I
Yeah.
do think that Kilhoun has a point there when he's discussing that. And we need to remember, Tolkien wasn't yes, the Lord of the Rings specifically is a story of like hope, for the lack of a better way of saying it. However, it's not inherently progressive. And when I say progressive, I just mean in terms of the ideals of just the modern outlook about how things are always
That's
going.
not what I
He-
meant. I meant that it was progressing in the sense of time moving forward, and that you
Oh.
can't ever return to the way things used to be. And I don't get the sense of hope from Lord of the Rings. I think it's a very sad and poignant book. There's a almost an uncanny sadness of the ancientness of the world closing in, and the brief specks of humanity trying to shine through. That's more so what I get from it.
I mean, like I said, like he didn't have like there's a difference between interpretations of history. You have the Whig view of history, and you have the cyclical view. The cyclical view understands history as ages, as we were talking about prior.
Correct.
I mean, and Tolkien understood that when he wrote that. Like each age had a different fundamental characteristic. Like say the first age of Middle Earth was the age of the gods. You had Iluvatar and the various
Anu.
other minor gods and the Anu. They were very interactive in the world, and it was very epic. And quite frankly, Sauron is like a It's like a glimmer of his former self.
minor god in comparison.
Well, he's also like he doesn't have the power that he used to in the Second Age, which the Second Age was the age of heroes when men came to the forefront, and you saw the great kings, the great heroes that like Aragorn will like reference as his ancestors that founded the great kingdoms. And then at the end of the Second Age into the Third Age, you see the Age of Man, you see the Dark Age, where you see the crumbling of these great civilizations into decay. And in the Lord of the Rings, it is like the final state. Like even Sauron is a victim of the Age of Decay. He does not have the power that he used to. Like I'm not talking about just sheerly because he lost the ring. It's because
I understand what you mean.
But yes, like him himself too. Like just lost. He decayed, and his powers in the Second Age are not the powers that he could ever obtain again in the Third Age.
Yeah, and that's to me more plays upon what I was saying in the sense of things that are long gone, that may be reflected throughout the ages as it continues. But I really get the sense of Tolkien's work being about the progression of time.
Well, yes, but then like in the Age of Man, you can still like have a restoration of the natural order, which that's what you see with Aragon, with his taking of the throne at the end of the towards the end of the Return of the King. So you also have that, and he's also anointed by Gandalf, which Gandalf he pretty much takes up like the position of the Pope in this timeline. So it's literally the divine appointing the temporal leadership as well to bring in more Catholic symbolatry there.
Mm-hmm.
Because technically in a Christian theology, only a bishop can anoint a monarch and bestow him with the crown in a coronation, because that's the divine giving the temporal authority.
So yeah, let's talk about. So I think one of the most important themes, though, I guess, in especially with the depiction of the Shire and the hobbits, there's supposed to be an agrarian sort of idyllic society. It's essentially the ideal Arcadia. I mean, of course, culturally, it's based on Western England, specifically southwestern England. But I'd say what's interesting is the society of the Shire is both politically, socially intended to be ideal, but compared to the Elvish and the Dwarvish and the kingdoms of men, or just the governments in general, it seems like almost that the Shire stands out specifically in that it does not have sort of like a centralized political structure.
I mean,
I would disagree. The Shire, they have their large noble families. The Tooks, for example, they have a sheriff, they have deputies, they have a mail service. There is some centralization. Overall, Hobbiton is more so the seat of the Shire, and their government's very unintrusive. It's idealistic in that respect. It's very English in that respect. But there is a very small, well-managed form of government, signified by they do have a mayor.
Here,
Hobbiton.
I'm gonna have to interject in that actually, because oddly enough, people always think that Hobbiton is a major village in the Shire when it's actually one of the smallest. If you read the books, it's actually Mickhill Delving, which is the center of the Shire.
Mhm.
So,
Hmm.
and it's a place that's never shown in the movies, which I find a bit strange, although it's only mentioned twice in the book, so yeah.
Regardless, they have a sheriff, they have a mail system, they obviously have some sort of taxes and some sort of small government.
And the sheriff and the mailman can nationalize anybody in the Shire
Correct,
as well.
they can. It's
Yeah.
very, very English. It's very, very English.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that was the whole point. I mean, culturally
that,
speaking.
that's just how like the feudal times were in general. Like you didn't like people try to like say, oh, the feudalism was like despotic and stuff, but no, it's honestly more like the Shire than it was like what the movies depict.
Yeah, I mean, there have been some. I'm not going to go and dig and find an article right now, but I read I think it was like in some sort of Catholic journal, discussing how the Shire is more or less a distributist society, almost like a cross between like a private law society almost and distributism, if that makes sense.
Yes, I would have to agree with that because what you see in the Shire, like economically, it well, one, most people are either small farmers or they have specialty crafts and trades, and they're artisans. There's no like there's no mass industry. There's no wage labor. It's all based upon essentially specialty skill and the production from craft, not from industrial output and just mass production. Unlike you see like in Mordor, where they represent industry and mass production.
Yeah, again, that is another theme. It is about the sort of the Lord of the Rings is. I know this is just one of the additional aspects to it, but it's a criticism of industrial society in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Oh, also another point. Tolkien is like, oh yeah, a son will take up his father's occupation, and that son will have a son that will also take up that occupation, and that family has like been like the blacksmiths for like generations, and that's just, I mean, that's like an accurate reflection to the Middle Ages as well, and it was very stable.
It's also a bit of a reflection on hobbits themselves. Tolkien describes them as being very sedentary and very set in their ways.
I mean, they don't like change very much.
They detest change.
Yes. Which would probably be one of the more tranquil societies ever to have existed, which man used to know at one age. But then, of course, I would have to say modern and in the industrial age destroyed the aspiration to have a Shire-like place on Earth today.
Yeah. And
even within the Shire, and I think in the same with modern man, it was not always perfect times. I mean, the massive hedge in the Shire, they were attacking the old forest, and the trees are so vindictive to this point that you can barely even walk through the old forest without the trees coming to life and attacking the hobbits.
Mm-hmm.
So it's reflected as idealistic more so, even though it's third person omniscient, it's obviously from Frodo's perspective, in the respect of as he leaves the Shire and more of the world is revealed to him at 52, right? More and more of the world becomes grittier and grittier as they leave. It's not as idealistic as it seemed.
Well, yeah. I don't really have a point to come off of that. Politicrat.
It's also somewhat true that this is reflected in Frodo's age, because this isn't really shown in the movie, but in the books, isn't it like between Gandalf leaving after
15 plus years, right?
It's 17 years, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
70.
Frodo's 33 at Bilbo's birthday at the beginning of the book, and and he's 50 when he departs the Shire when Gandalf sends him on his quest.
Yeah, he was the same age as Bilbo, I believe.
Yeah, give or take a year or two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was.
So they had the same birthday. But, yeah.
So yeah, but in terms of political like I feel like one of the biggest sort of mistakes or mistake that people make when looking at Lord of the Rings is they tend to see it, oh yeah, this is like medieval fantasy, but it really isn't medieval. There's really very little that is medieval about it. It's like, yeah, you'll have castles, you'll have like warriors fight. You sort of have like a medieval-ish aesthetic, but unlike something like D&D, there is a sort of like aesthetic and thematic departure from it that makes it seem like a heroic age, more or less. It's not. It's kind of outside of time and space in a sense. It's not medieval in the same way that Game of Thrones is. It's kind of its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, like he wanted it to be eternal, and it reflects very well in how he depicted the world. Because I mean, there are some aspects to humanity that don't change, and he very much introduced that very well into his writings.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, like you could say, for instance, humanity has almost always used bows for the entire length of our existence. We've always had some form of like armor and swords and stuff. Like you can go to like ancient Greece and like they have the hoplons and they're using bronze shields and bronze tip spears and bronze plated armor. So like it's not unrealistic to like take I mean, of course, Peter Jackson's film make it look pretty medieval and aesthetic, but you could say it's like any period before the industrial age.
Yeah, I mean that is, but okay. So let's talk a little bit about Numenor specifically, because again, I mean, because most people's familiarity with Middle Earth is the Third Age, or what is seen in The Hobbit and in The Lord of the Rings, more specifically the films. However, and again, this does go back to the theme of sort of decline and change, like the changing order. But we need to remember, yeah, Gondor has already lost its former glory, but even Gondor itself was established as a colony of Numenor after the destruction. And even though it itself is a kingdom in decline by the time of the Third Age, or by the time of the Lord of the Rings, and even during like in between the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, when Sauron was gaining power again. Even so, Gondor itself is nowhere near as powerful, nor does it even come close to matching the glory that Numenor had.
Well, funny thing about Numenor, like literally Apostolic Majesty just did a stream a couple hours ago about the fall of Numenor, which I would highly recommend everybody go check that out. Apostolic Majesty is a quite an excellent scholar on history, literature, and Catholic theology.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so what was he specifically talking about with regards to the fall of Numenor? Because
it was a discussion about the fall of Numenor, the decline of Numenor, and their fall into human sacrifice, and kind of like how the Jews and the King of James in the Book of Kings, I mean, where they went to the worship of Baal in that period, and Tolkien took bits and pieces of that and took how like the decline of Judea into human sacrifice. He represented that into the fall of Numenor, and their fall into hedonism in general, with the whisperings of Sauron and their aspirations to conquer and become king of all men by the kings of Numenor. And the kings of Numenor became obsessed in that idolatrous obsession to take over all the realms of the because Middle Earth is only like essentially one continent in a greater world. You have like the Undying Lands, you have Numenor, I forget the other continents. Yeah.
They're just
Hathor.
called the
Hathor was Africa, I think. I think that's what it was called. Was it Hathor?
no. It was just the Dark Lands or the Hinterlands or Hitherlands.
Okay.
But either
They
way,
weren't really named.
yeah. But Sauron, like, he actually did dominate all of Middle Earth in the Second Age when Numenor was still kicking about. And because Sauron called himself King of all men in Middle Earth, the Numenorians went to go essentially usurp that title from Sauron. And and when they set sail and landed on Middle Earth, Sauron, well, he still had his Elvish form. He didn't have his corrupted form at that time. He went before the Numenorian king and prostrated himself and submitted himself to the king of Numenor and started to manipulate him as part of his court towards the child sacrifice and human sacrifice in general. And most of the society turned to the worship of Baal, or like I forget. It was actually Morgoth in this. I keep on saying Baal because I relate it to like the our world parallel. But they turned to the worship of Morgoth from Aelio-Luvatar because they viewed it as a way of liberation from their change to their chains of Aelio-Luvatar. And the old believers, the ones that kept on following Aelio-Luvatar within Numenor, they would have to essentially be secret cults underground to keep themselves from being sacrificed up to Morgoth. And I'm not like an expert on the fall of Numenor. Like that's I would highly recommend everybody check out Apostolic Majesty's stream on it because it's really well done and they know this stuff like the back of their hand. I'm just like an amateur with Numenor.
I forget what happened for. Was the battle at the end of the Second Age, the Battle of the Last Alliance? Did that happen before or after the fall of Numenor?
Way after.
Yeah,
like
way after.
Nearly 300 years after, actually.
Because I'm really bad with the chronology prior to the Third Age. So
yeah, there was a brother of the corrupted king of Numenor that went to Middle Earth and essentially founded Gondor. And
it wasn't a brother; it was a very distant cousin.
Oh, very distant cousin.
Okay. He was descended from the king's great grandmother.
Huh.
Yeah.
Either way, a distant relative to the monarchy of Numenor, and they essentially founded Gondor in Middle Earth and took essentially the loyalists to Aelio-Luvatar over to Middle Earth, and and then when the fall of Numenor happens, when the Numenorians would attempt to sail out to the Undying Lands where they were forbidden to go, Aelio-Luvatar opened up the seas and swallowed up all the Numenorians to drown.
And again, this does go back to mythology because every single there's not a single like high mythological tradition that does not have a flood myth. And most have multiple flood myths of some sort. And we can also see, and I know this is probably the easiest parallel, like I think that Tolkien actually has more parallels between the fall of Numenor with Plato's destruction of Atlantis. There's more similarities there as opposed to the biblical flood, with the exception of humanity turning away from God and being destroyed. That's similar, but at least from a visual perspective, a story perspective, like a pseudo-historical perspective, pseudo-history in terms of because this is a fake history, but there's a lot more similarities too, like Atlantis.
It's actually funny that you mentioned that because if you translate Numenor into the High Elvish, with using the actual rules for High Elvish, it comes out as Atalante.
That makes sense.
Which Tolkien himself did not actually intend that.
That's funny.
It was just a happy accident.
That's actually really funny.
Maybe it's divine hand guiding it. I'm literally like I'm half serious about those things. Like I could actually say it is. I do believe that the divine does actually guide our actions in this world, even how stupid they might be. But yeah, so yeah, I think Apostolic Majesty did also mention Plato's Atlantis in that when discussing about the fall of Numenor. But it's just God smiting man when he gets too big for his britches.
One of the main differences, though, is because Atlantis isn't really a part of the sort of, and I know it's a loose canon, but it's not really part of the canonical Greco-Roman mythology. It was more of an allegory that was created by Plato in order to convey a larger truth. He essentially created his own flood myth in the form of Atlantis. But historically speaking, he based it on the historical event of the destruction of Crete in the 16th century BC.
You're just upset they found Atlantis's legitimate ruins.
Yep.
But it's bedtime for me. It was wonderful talking, gentlemen.
All
Please
right.
continue
Good
on,
night.
okay? Have a
Good
wonderful
night.
night.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So, yeah, I mean, like in Greek mythology, they did have flood myths before Plato's time. So
Yeah.
it's, I mean, with Atlantis, I mean, I do leave it up to the possibility that there was actually an Atlantean civilization. Same with like India has like Lemuria. Lemuria is supposed to be like the supercontinent that's like south of India, potentially that the Vedas talk about at the beginning of the Kali Yuga and the destruction of Lemuria. They have a different name for Lemuria, but that's just what Europeans called it. But yeah, there's essentially always a lost continent in many mythologies as well.
Yeah. Anglism, I haven't heard from you in a while. What do you have to comment on this particular
Well,
aspect?
I'm very much of the opinion that, like, the general consensus on civilization is that it began, at least in the sort of Proto-Indo-European part of the world, was it was the first city, it was Uruk, it was Mesopotamia, but there's at least in the past couple of decades there's been discoveries which make people think there may have been like sophisticated civilizations before that. And I think a lot of these early mythologies, like Hindu mythology, and talks of stuff like Atlantis and Atlantis-ish talks of like great floods in many different mythologies, may kind of be pointing towards like sort of so I guess you could say pre-natural disaster civilizations, and it may be the case that like the sort of allegory is being drawn towards that almost unknowingly, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And like religion and sort of religion is drawing on kind of this. I guess you could say this these sort of pre-biblical civilizations. I would call them pre-biblical because well, I'm a Christian myself, so it's just sort of these unknown early societies, and Atlantis could very well, or what we call Atlantis, could very well be one of them.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a lost continent, but just a civilization somewhere in the world that has been lost to time, perhaps somewhere near an ocean, which is probably the case, because you need to be near an ocean, or at least near a major river, in order to support irrigation. So,
I mean, I think it's definitely like these legends and myths. They're based on multiple things that sort of have happened, but the stories are themselves like composites into a single story in order to tell that greater truth.
I mean, like the fact that I just say if there's there's like a lot of civilizations all like separated across the world saying the same thing. There has to be a truth to it. Then
Absolutely.
I don't care if modern science wants to deny it. It's like modern science can honestly shove it. And but like say in the Vedic civilization in India, they do have a Garden of Eden mythology as well. Of course, they don't say Garden of Eden, but it's very similar in characters to Adam and Eve. They have a man and a woman cause the fall of humanity into the Kali Yuga by embracing sin.
I
And
thought the Kali Yuga began with the Mahabharata.
well, it did, but like man falling into their own state where they can die, like death was something unnatural. Which I mean, that's also something you see in Tolkien as well, where the Numenorians had extremely long lifespans, kind of like even longer than like Old Testament lifespans. And you see that like in the Vedic civilizations, like death was even anathema to pre-Kali Yuga man, and only after the fall into sin did men actually be able to die.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the first king of Numenor, who's also Elrond's brother, if you didn't know, ruled for like 800 years.
Mm-hmm.
It was, and then we also had the Dunedain too, like Aragorn.
The
who-
Dunedain are descended from them.
of the Numenorians. Yeah.
Yep.
Um,
And that's why like the Northmen.
Dunedain actually in the first age are even more interesting though. If you want to read in it, they're called the Edain then, and then it's actually just 3 households, and they're the only 3 that sided with the elves for the entire first age and didn't betray them.
The first
Hence
age
why
is
they were
really
then blessed with
interesting. I feel
long
like that is probably, in my opinion, it's the most interesting period in the history of Middle Earth.
Definitely. The fourth age is also kind of interesting, but we just don't know enough to go and really discuss it at all.
Yeah.
I mean, the fourth age is post Return of the King. Did Tolkien write anything for after Return of the King?
No, but he
well, yes and
he wrote
no.
notes. He had plans of bringing back Morgoth, and he was going to have sort of there was going to be like I forget what I think it was like called Agaroth, which was based on Ragnarok mythology, which was supposed to be the last battle.
Mm-hmm. The end times.
Yeah, actually, the cool thing about one of those notes is that if you've ever heard of Turin, who's a very important character in the first age, he's actually the one who kills Morgoth in the end.
Yeah, he's like a messianic figure. This is a good example of how Tolkien, for instance, he didn't really like allegory, like direct parallels, but he was very subtle. But he still liked symbolism. Symbolism is riddled throughout Lord of the Rings. But instead of like Aslan, who is literally Jesus, like he's not even really an allegory of Jesus. He actually is supposed to be Jesus, like in a different dimension in C.S. Lewis's books. But the difference is, so there are multiple Christ figures in the Lord of the Rings, in the form of Frodo, Gandalf, and Aragorn. They each represent the different parts of Jesus. So Frodo represents Jesus, or Christ the priest. Gandalf is Christ the prophet. Aragorn is Christ the king. And you even see a lot of this other symbolism, like how Aragorn going through not the Undying Lands, the Halls of the Dead is essentially that harrowing of hell with Good Saturday. Like that is 100% drawing from that sort of the theological images from that. So,
what was I gonna say? I mean, that's also like part of the natural order thing, where like all Christian kings were supposed to try to live up to the archetype of Christ the King. Well, then all the pontiffs were supposed to try to live up to Christ the priest, and everybody in their own lives has tried to live up to Christ in the different aspects that he took upon this earth, because he was truly the man of all seasons. If anyone have watched that movie, but
I have not.
It's pretty decent if you like Saint Sir Thomas More, but
Okay.
but the term "man of all seasons," of course, meant fully encompassing all the different archetypes of men into one, and that's what Christ was as a figure. And when he came to this earth in flesh, but like yeah, that's why like Aragorn like lives like as Christ the King. Of course, Gandalf, like he's literally supposed to be like their angel figures. So Christ the prophet, and yeah, Frodo is definitely a Brahmin, so Christ the priest.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
But so anyway, what were they saying specifically before? Oh yeah, so the let's talk a little bit about Gondor and how Gondor was founded, because I mean I do notice there is sort of a more or less the story is it was a colony of survivors from the destruction of Numenor. But what about the again? So I'm a little rusty when it comes to the particular social structures of Numenor as opposed to Gondor. But what are the differences between the two fundamentally? Or is Gondor supposed to be like a
Gondor is supposed to
less
be
cool carbon
a
copy?
reflection. It's supposed
Okay.
to be the Middle Earth reflection because it was founded by the exiles of Numenor. It was by the ones that kept on following Aelia Luvatar and didn't fall to the sways of Sauron and the cult of Morgoth.
No, continue. Sorry.
Oh, I'm just saying, like, so, like, when you see, like, Gondor, it is just a degraded form of Numenor at its greatest. And that's why, like, whenever Aragorn, like, goes into battle, he chants Isildur because that was the great king of Numenor, in which he is descendant of.
I thought he shouted Elendil.
He also shouts that, but he also said Isildur a few
No,
times.
he never did say Isildur.
Really? I thought I remember here. I thought I remember him. I thought I remember him doing Isildur a couple times, but
It's possible.
at least discussing
Actually,
Isildur.
I just looked it up. He didn't even say Elendil either. He only said it like maybe twice. He normally would just shout the name of his sword, which was the reforged blades that was broken.
Yeah,
Wasn't that Elendil?
Also, Elendil's sword.
but I know he references Isildur a lot, though. I know that because he's very proud of being descendants of Isildur.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I would be too.
well, yeah, any man should. Although take pride also if you're a peasant as well. So take pride in your ancestors. Period. But
So, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, but there also is, and again, because we know that Tolkien did draw off of other works of literature within sort of the Anglo-Saxon canon, and I mean, one of the big things, one of his problems was because there are very few surviving Arthurian like original Arthurian legends. I mean, like, you have Gildas, you have Bede, Geoffrey of Monmouth was pretty much the only Anglo-Saxon writer of like Arthur or chronicler of Arthurian tales, but even then, that was already after the Norman conquest, about 100 years later. But I mean, of course, the Arthurian legends are fundamentally Celtic, not Anglo-Saxon. But either way, the majority of the Arthurian legend itself was heavily influenced by France. And that's where you got things like Camelot and the Round Table and the chivalric tradition and courtly love. That all came from France. And it's sort of, because you notice if you read early Arthurian stuff, again, like Gildas and Bede, specifically something like Coleridge and Olwen, which isn't specifically about King Arthur, but he's the cousin of Coleridge because it's Coleridge going and doing tasks to win the hand of Olwen from her father, but then I think she gets kidnapped by a giant. It's been a while. But that's a fundamentally Celtic tale, and you do see a lot of those that tradition, that general theme, and similar stories in the Silmarillion. But yeah, what he was more or less trying to do was draw on many Arthurian ideas, and one of them was the idea of the wasteland, of the Fisher King, things like that. And you see a lot of similarities between like Theoden and the story of the Fisher King. And again, it's another example of restoring the natural order, because he very similar to what happens in like Gondor as well, the Return of the King. But yeah, I mean the story of Theoden being manipulated by Saruman and Orthanc and Grima Wormtongue is an homage to the story of the Fisher King.
Yeah. Also, I love Tolkien for how he names his characters. You can obviously tell they're going to be evil. Grima Wormtongue. But Theoden, yeah. I mean, what was your point again? I don't know. I distracted myself.
Again, the restoration of the natural order, the restoration of the proper monarchy, because the whole thing is with Denethor, because he's not the king, he's the steward. So he's just ruling in the king's absence. But that had basically become the norm. That becomes the status quo over the course of hundreds of years, since there has not been a king of Gondor for a couple hundred years. But then the people are complacent in Gondor. They're fine with that. They don't even really. They're very apathetic with regards to the rightful king returning, and even Aragorn too. Like, doesn't really, at least in the beginning, doesn't have that much of an interest. Like, yeah, he knows it's his duty.
Yeah, that's not in the books. In the books, he immediately just plays the role of the Returned King. Or
he does. No, he does immediately. I'm talking about his backstory before that.
No, that's not in the books.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I believe you. You're probably correct. Maybe I'm just.
I mean, like, he was literally like carrying the broken sword before, like, when he met Frodo initially, he was carrying it. Like, he was intending upon reforging it and going back to Gondor and taking his throne. So,
I'm probably my brain is probably just filled. I haven't read the books in a very long time. So I think I'm probably just it's movie brain right now.
I mean, literally, we were having this conversation about this stream like a couple weeks ago, and I bought the audiobooks.
Yeah,
and you didn't like listen to them at all.
No, I listened to I listened to half of Fellowship.
Well, then why don't, if you made it through half, then you should have remembered that he had the broken blade.
No, he did have the broken blade. Yeah, no, that's why I don't like what the movie did. Like, the movie was trying to do something. They were trying to do something new. They were trying to make it cool and like poetic. Where in Return of the King, it's when he reforges it, but he doesn't reforge it in the book. It's not in Return of the King when he reforges the blade.
Yeah, it's in Fellowship. Like, it's in the second half.
Of Elrond. Yeah.
When they go out on his journey, in fact, like, it's his only weapon according to the book, if I remember right. He only took that sword. So And in fact, also when they passed by the two kings guarding the frontier lands, he does bow in respect to his ancestors while they are going by, and making an oath to them. I forget exactly like the words, but he makes a subtle oath to his ancestors.
Yeah. The one thing I wasn't really a fan of, and again, maybe I at least I don't remember it being in the book, but one thing I didn't particularly care about in the movies was I didn't really like how the films depicted the relationship between Elrond and Aragorn, because, like, yeah, they were close, but there was just like there definitely seemed to be some sort of like passive aggressive type stuff going on, at least in Fellowship, between Elrond and Aragorn
in the movie you're talking about.
And I didn't like that, because like he was Elrond, if I remember correctly, was more or less his foster father.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, after having read the book again, I was like, why did they have that in the movie? But
and Elrond, I believe, wanted Aragorn and Arwen to potentially be together. However, he was still. I know the only trade-off, of course, was that Arwen would have to choose a mortal life. I don't remember how much that was touched on in the book, but
in the book, the whole, like, I don't remember the relationship touched once, but I don't know. I may have just like when you're reading it, when you're doing an audiobook, it's like sometimes you like space out. So I might have done that, but I don't remember Eowyn specifically actually like having much presence in the Fellowship. So I think that's more in following books. Am I
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, but for one, it's Arwen. Eowyn is someone else.
Yeah. Eowyn is Theoden's niece.
Oh yeah. It's a tired brain trying to remember all these names. But yeah, Arwen. Yeah. Although it's like it's funny, Tolkien's like, oh yeah, she's absolutely beautiful, ravingly gorgeous, but doesn't have a scene really.
And I mean, because it's because it was blockbuster, or a blockbuster film. They needed to add certain things to kind of appeal to certain people. That's why they added they touched on the
garden
romance side plot, because in the book it's like, oh yeah, Aragorn and Arwen are a thing, but like it doesn't really show it. It's just kind of like
here's the thing: they didn't really add in that much for the relationship. They only added in some weird passive aggressive parts. You can actually read the relationship in the book. There's a story in the appendix called "The Tale of Aragorn and Arwen," and it's that which the movie referenced.
Yeah. No, but I'm talking about I'm talking about specifically the actual narrative, not the appendix.
Yeah. Why would the appendix not be part of the actual narrative?
No, it is. It's part of Lord of the Rings, but I'm referring to like the actual narrative. It's like not that. Like, do you see what I'm saying?
Well,
the actual like meat of the book.
I think what you're trying to say is Tolkien put it in the appendix on purpose because it would derail the rest of the story.
Yeah. That's the whole point of it, what appendixes are. So there's not like a bunch of info dump within the narratives itself.
Yeah. I mean, also like Tolkien was focused on getting Frodo on the journey. That was the entire fellowship. It wasn't like, imagine if they were going to do like, oh yeah, also Eowyn and Aragorn are meeting in the garden and they're having their lovey-dovey scene. That would just been honestly kind of derailing if I was like a first time reader, and like I would have like no experience with the movies or anything like back in the days when they were released.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm playing defense for Tolkien's writing style.
Yeah, a lot of people aren't really a fan of Tolkien's writing style because it doesn't read like a traditional novel in the same way as like many other fantasy stories. But the thing is, he was intentionally writing it like that because he was trying to write it like a myth, like an old epic, as I think Beppis mentioned when she was still here earlier.
Yeah, I mean, his like the problem with like modern fantasy writers is they write fantasy to write fantasy. Tolkien wasn't writing like fantasy just for fantasy's sake. He was writing it to be like we've all said, the mythology of England essentially and the Anglo-Saxon people. And that's why it reads that way. It reads in the third person omniscient. It's supposed to be like a story being told to you. It's not you're not really like in the eyes of Frodo or in the eyes of like these characters. They're just part of this grand saga and these great heroes. But that's like the difference. Like if you write third person omniscient, I will attest is one of the harder styles to do. It's like you have to like completely retool your mind if you do like limited narrations, like say third person limited or first person. It's very hard to retool your mind to third person omniscient, but clearly Tolkien did it extremely well. I'd probably say even as good or better than probably a lot of like the ancient Greek scholars too, because he was falling in that same school of thought.
Mm-hmm. But let's talk a little bit about Mordor specifically, because Sauron, his role in sort of the empire he's trying to carve out. Again, so originally, at least Sauron wasn't originally from Mordor. From what I remember, he was because I know he was originally the lieutenant of Morgoth. So that was in the north. Was it the northeast or northwest where Morgoth was originally stationed?
Um,
I don't remember.
Mordor was
I
originally stationed where the Arctic Circle is for Middle Earth.
okay.
Yeah, okay, that sounds about right. So that was not. So that was to the north, and then Angmar. That's the opposite side. That's the north.
And Mars in the north, yes.
Yeah. And so, what would you say, Sauron? How would you describe Mordor in terms of its overall structure? I don't even want to say political because it's not even really a government. It's just Sauron. It's just Sauron like ruling.
The politics of
Politics.
Mordor.
Yeah. I mean, you can play. I mean, I know it's non-canon. It's a very good fan fiction, but the Shadow of Mordor game, where it shows the sort of internal politics between the orc clans and the war chiefs and everything. That was actually kind of interesting. I don't know if any of you guys played those games, but
I played a little bit, but not enough to get into the story. But I mean, from what I could pick up from the Fellowship, like the Two Towers and Return of the Kings, the books aren't coming to mind because I read that they were so long ago. But like I remember in the Fellowship, like orcs, if like you kill their captain, like then they essentially go berserk and they will hunt you down and exterminate you. Like that's how they modus operandi. So you can tell by the fact that they have a hierarchy, whether that's just the captain himself, the leader of the war bands, is the only like officer or the only like aristocrat or something of the orcs, but clearly like the greatest of the orcs within that band. Or if they have like a more evolved structure from there, which I could not make a judgment. Chicago, do you know anything about orc military structure?
Basically, their upper commanders, which would usually be Nazgul or one of their lieutenants, or for Isengard's case, Saruman himself, would appoint an orc to be in charge. But also, you can have another faction appoint another orc to be in charge, so then they decide that on who kills the other one first. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I actually did not know this because that is exactly how it is in the Shadow of Mordor game. And in the game, they actually had this. They created this thing called the Nemesis system, which has been used by other games as well. But where the AI actually remembers you if you had previously like killed another war chief or if you had fought them previously, and they will like come and hunt you down. The main character, who's a Dunedain ranger.
Yeah, and that's like just in the Fellowship. Like, you don't kill an orc captain unless you intend to kill the entire war band because they'll hunt you down, and they'll remember you for killing their war chief essentially.
But if somebody in the war band kills the war chief, then I think their cult, like the orcish cult, they become the new war chief. Like that's how the success works.
Which I found that funny. Like Games Workshop, when they made 40k orcs, they did the exact same thing. It's like you kill the war boss, and then you become the boss.
Well, yeah, that's actually because for 40k they were basing those orcs off of Warhammer Fantasy, and when Fantasy was first created in I think the early 80s, the orcs in it were just orcs from Tolkien. Then they evolved over time to just become a meme.
Yeah, they become like British football fans, but
yeah, they then just become the average British guy from Newcastle.
But I also feel like they took like the term wog from Tolkien as well because they have their wogs, which is also their form of organization for orcs.
A warg is just a wolf for orcs.
Oh,
they don't really have the word wog in Tolkien at all.
Well, at least when I was in the audio book, like the pronouncer said wog, so I was like, what? That sounds like something from 40k.
It might just be a British accent version of saying ward, which, well, those are the very large wolves that orcs would ride at times.
The narrator was actually the actor for Smeagol. He recently did all the audiobooks for The War of the Rings, and was released on Audible.
Nice. The audiobooks that I really liked listening to, I can only find on archive.org because they use the music for the audiobooks from the movies, but it was
Oh.
copyright infringement. Those audiobooks are by a guy named Phil Dragash and are actually really good. I can go and send you the link after the show is done.
Okay. So I was thinking we go for another 20 minutes or so, wrap it up. And again, because there were quite a few technical difficulties tonight, and then I had to start, like you guys know the drill. I was thinking we at some point, whether tomorrow or 3 days or a week or whatever, whenever everyone's available, we do a follow-up, kind of a more I guess a more structured one, a less chaotic one.
Well, we've pretty much been focusing mostly on the Fellowship. I mean, we have touched on other things, but we could probably like go to the Two Towers, like for a theme for next one. If we go to specifically talking about the Two Towers. The Fellowship, like for the audience, is like honestly pretty straightforward and not that much action within it. It is the journey of Frodo out of the Shire into the world and discovering all these things like Tom Bombadil, like not featured in the films, but it's just kind of like the wacky adventures of like what this world is, that is Middle Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And just for the audience sake, Tom Bombadil, he's a character that they meet in the woods, like after they immediately leave the Shire, pretty much, and just kind of like this caretaker of the forest and this being that is actually higher than Sauron in terms of power and the hierarchy of the divine entities. So the Ring of Power
actually implies that Tom Bombadil is supposed to just be Eru of Luvatar just hanging out.
Yeah, potentially.
That's my theory. Yeah.
I mean, his name in Elvish just means first and eldest, which implies that he's older than the Valar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was there before anyone
literally
else.
Puts on the One Ring and it does nothing, and he just starts dancing around like a meme, and it's great.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that's the guy who just doesn't give a crap about much about anything, is also the most powerful character in the entire Legendary.
Mm-hmm. And he literally, like, he's married to a nature goddess as well, so it's
like he has the power to just take over Middle Earth within seconds, but all he does with it is just hang out in one really tiny forest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Tom Bombadil always confused me, at least the first time when I read it, because he was kind of just there. Like I like Tom Bombadil. I'm a fan of Tom Bombadil, but he just doesn't fit into the narrative of Lord of like the Fellowship.
Well, I mean, he's there because it's a kid's novel.
Not Lord of the Rings isn't. No, The Hobbit was a kid's novel. Lord of the Rings wasn't necessarily a children's book.
Fellowship of the Ring was supposed to be a kid's novel originally.
Originally I believe that, but then it like turned into something else, because The Hobbit 100% is a children's book though. Like there's no question that it's not a children's book.
I mean, I'd probably say like the first half.
Children's book and the Fellowship of the Ring isn't, because even in The Hobbit, 3 characters die.
Well, remember, children's books back
gruesomely
then were different than children's books today. Yeah, they were actually like they weren't.
Well, yeah, like the Brothers Grimm and most of Hans Christian Andersen's works are incredibly dark and brutal.
But they weren't really. But fairy tales weren't necessarily written for children explicitly, though. That's one of the big differences. Whereas,
but I mean, still, what makes the Fellowship of the Ring not a children's book?
I mean, I would have to concur that it does read like a child's book for at least the first half of the Fellowship. But remember, like Tolkien wrote in the preface of it that he pretty much wrote up to like the Gate of Moria, and then he put it down for like several years and didn't like go back to it. And I think he probably had a fundamental mental change.
It changed so much over time too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just as it progresses, like you can tell, like the tone is just getting more and more serious and more adult as a story than when he previously was in the Shire. Because the Shire is, I also think like the tonal thing was intentional, where the Shire is this innocent, unscarred, virgin land, and then as you go on, you get to the the more, let's just say, matured parts of the world where they have endured the hardships of what can be wrought upon this world that the Shire had not been forced to endure yet.
Mhm.
I love that Chad Bombadil meme, dude.
There are multiple of them. But,
Well, yeah, because Bombadil is the ultimate Chad. He is peak male performance.
honestly, Tom, do you know who? Remember? No, it wasn't Tom Bombadil. Remember the Brown Wizard, or Radagast? I actually think that was one of the more in terms of the Hobbit films, which are very, very flawed. However, in hindsight, looking back at them, definitely better than Rings of Power. But I actually did like how they did Radagast in that. However, he reminded me a little too much of Tom Bombadil, and I think it would have been interesting if they would have made him Tom Bombadil instead of taking Radagast, because
Okay, if they made him Tom Bombadil, I would actually be even more mad. Because Bombadil canonically has never left the Old Forest, or at least forests that are like the Old Forest. So what would he be doing in the middle of Eastern Middle Earth?
oh no, you're absolutely correct. You know what? Yeah, he did go to Eastern Middle Earth in the movies.
Yeah, and
Radagast is in Eastern Middle Earth. Like, canonically speaking, his dwelling is just east of the Anduin River. So that's why they used him. It also makes sense because, well, he talked to nature a lot, and nature helped out the dwarves a lot in the movies.
Wait, Tom, I thought, but they meet Tom Bombadil in Fellowship of the Ring. He wasn't in the East then when they met him.
no, he was literally like
We're talking about Radagast.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying Tom Bombadil. Okay, never mind. Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Radagast's house is just east of the Anduin.
Mhm.
And he features a lot when the dwarves go east of the Anduin.
Yeah.
That, and also Radagast is implied to be the reason why the Eagles help out Gandalf so much.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, this is actually
you don't
why
even-
I really would have loved it if Radagast was used more by Tolkien, because he's a very interesting character.
Exactly.
Then also the
Yeah,
Blue
nobody-
Wizards
and really-
having never been used at all. They don't even
and
have
he never really
names.
talks about what Radagast is doing by the time of the War of the Ring. Because like there are theories I know that like he was corrupted also, or he died or whatever. I don't necessarily buy into them.
Oh no, I don't buy any of those theories. I just think that he eventually just went native.
I mean, yeah.
He returned to monkey. He's an Anne Prim. That's his political ideology.
I mean, he doesn't even have an ideology. Like, he's just by that naturally.
Dude, if I still had a Twitter account, I would rename it right now to Radagast Kaczynski.
But like I mean, Saruman, like in the Fellowship, like actually like did say, "Oh, you mean like that nature fool essentially." I forget exactly what he said about Radagast, but he bemoans him to Gandalf when they interact at the tower. I forget what the tower is named that Saruman is at.
It's Isengard.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Well, technically, the tower's name is Orthanc, but Isengard is
like the duchy that he has, or whatever. I don't know what the proper
technically, yeah.
His like bishopric or something. And he's kind of like a, I don't know, bishop prince, I guess. If you were going to correlate it with like a feudal equivalent.
I guess if you really wanted to try and make Tolkien allegorical, which I don't necessarily agree with, you could say that Saruman is a lot like the corruption of the medieval Catholic Church just before the Reformation. Because let's face it, before the Reformation, the church was pretty corrupt, and the Reformation happened for a reason. You know, when people started to read the Bible themselves and realizing that their local priest wasn't really saying what the Bible was saying.
I mean, it wasn't like the corruption of the church; it was the corruption of the clergy. The church itself, metaphysically, is infallible, but the clergy are not.
I guess, but that's more semantics. Like,
No,
you know
that-
what I was trying to say.
Yeah, but I like to clarify for the audience because
All right.
especially because
Man, it's 12:46 in the morning.
most plebeians will not understand the difference between the corruption of the individuals that make up the church and the spiritual essence of the church itself, which the
Man, it's
spiritual
almost 1 a.m. Please just give me a break.
Well, no, I have to make this point because I hate historiographers that just say, "Oh, the Catholic Church became corrupted." It's like, no, the Catholic Church cannot be corrupted. The clergy can.
Again, man, it's almost 1 a.m.
Yeah,
I am literally only being kept awake through sheer spite for Amazon.
yeah. But going back to Tolkien, I mean, also like the fact that Saruman got rid of his purity of his white robes is just like Tolkien's like a little bit nail over the head there, where it's like, oh yeah, he destroyed his purity of his white robes by making it multicolored and tie-dye essentially.
You know,
Yeah,
I
that
don't
would've
think
been-
that's exactly the
aesthetically
point that he
speaking,
was.
That would have kind of been weird in the movies, like how they done that.
Okay,
Yeah, it would.
I mean, the thing is, say what you will about that, but I don't think that was the point Tolkien was trying to make. I think he
Well-
was trying to make the point that, like, if you stray too far from the vision that God has for you, you will inevitably get corrupted. And well, Saruman was intended to be the White Wizard, and only the White Wizard.
Yeah, he was the
So
he
the
was a
fact that then
Lucifer
he tried to
figure.
become every other color, that's how it got corrupted.
Yeah, he was a Lucifer figure where he was the highest of the what do you call like the Gandalf
The
and
Istari.
yeah, the Istari. He was the highest, and then he corrupted himself by thinking that he could take take
Have
more
the roles
power,
of the others.
and yes, and also like usurp the power of God by essentially.
You know, actually, one thing that's interesting about that is that Saruman and Sauron were originally servants for the Valar of smithing and creation, Aule,
Mhm.
who also created the dwarves. So it's an interesting allegory. Well, allegory might not be the right term, but that
Focus
Tolkien
on
is essentially saying that if you have an original focus on industry and you don't limit yourself, you will inevitably become corrupted.
It's the Faustian. It's more or less the Faustian.
Faustian man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if Tolkien read Spengler, but definitely there are some very similar.
I mean, he probably read Faust. So
He absolutely read Faust. He absolutely read T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. He absolutely.
I don't know.
read-
Tolkien doesn't
He
really.
might have read Ulysses.
and
Tolkien doesn't
Paradise
really,
Lost definitely.
Tolkien doesn't really read me as a guy who would, read political philosophy or historiography.
Well, no,
We're not
like
talking. Yeah, I mean,
Faust is it's a play, so
yeah.
Yeah.
with
But I mean, I'm
philosophical
talking-
allegories.
I'm talking more about him reading Spengler.
He
Not,
wouldn't have
which
read.
I
He
really
probably
don't.
didn't read Spengler.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think he read Spengler.
I mean, like, let's go ask Christopher Tolkien. Oh wait, he's dead.
Yeah.
Let's go and ask Tolkien's daughter. Is she still alive?
Let's go and ask the showrunners of the Rings of Power.
Did
No.
Tolkien
No,
read
they'll then
Spengler?
say they'll then just say that I'm gay or something and give me a butt plug.
I remember I was watching it was a Lotus Eaters video from several months ago, but it was like 30 minutes long, and they were just ripping apart like all of these like, okay, so you know how like the quote unquote woke, I don't like that term anymore, but the quote unquote woke nerd media, they like to put like queer allegories. They interpret everything like as if it's some sort of like queer allegory. And at the same time, what they also do is they'll always stand for the villains now, which is
Yeah, because
really
they're
strange.
fucking evil.
Yeah, no, like literally, they think that Saruman was like the good guy because he stood for progress and like industry, and that, which is funny because the left also, I thought they were the environmental.
Well,
They're
no,
environmental
Historically,
until
the
they're
left has
not.
always been split between environmentalism and like boundless industrial progress.
well, where's that meme? Like I saw a meme of like a left-wing environmentalist walking through like a farms with like animals about and all that, and saying like, well, this is awful, and then it switches to wind farms and solar fields and industrialized farming, and that's like their peak environmentalist future, and it's like absolutely disgusting. And Tolkien would have been like he was a true environmentalist. The
Absolutely.
left-wing environmentalists don't even understand what they advocate for, and in fact they are more destructive to the environment with their policies than they are productive. Like Tolkien's vision would be far more productive for an environmentalist movement.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why like right-wing ecology is also like more effective as well.
Treebeard is basically like the Lorax of Lord of the Rings.
The Lorax, who also like destroys fortresses.
Yep.
Why? Because he gets pissed that his tree friends got cut down.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you don't. To be an environmentalist, you don't need to be a hippie. You can be a treebeard.
Yeah.
That's the 1960s ruined everything for everything. Like it ruined environmentalism. It ruined drug use. It ruined everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
But so DV asks, have you considered the increase of GDP in Isengard under Saruman?
Oh God!
He cares about GDP.
Keynesian Saruman.
Yeah.
The GDP of Isengard has tripled since Saruman has taken it on.
Yes,
economic...
according to our lead economist, Saruman Krugman.
Krugman. I don't know. I'm trying to think. That does sound like sounds like it would be the name of like some kind of dark lieutenant, Krugman.
Ooh, Kai Krugman.
My God.
Oh my God. Dude, now I wish that I still had a Twitter account and I didn't delete mine, or else then I would have made a literal army of like meme accounts out of this one stream.
Yeah, but Tolkien, this is why like George Martin like is not a good writer in comparison to Tolkien, is because the focus on like GDP and materialistic things, like say when George Martin said, well, what is Aragorn's tax policy? And that's what I'm doing with the Song of Ice and Fire. Just like, you're missing the point of the Lord of the Rings if you're focused on Aragorn's temporal reign and not focus on what he represents.
You know, the funniest thing about George R.R. Martin is he can't finish his books because he will refute himself by doing so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean,
which
honestly,
to me just shows that he is such a terrible author that he can't even keep control of his own narrative. So why should I respect him?
Well, I mean, I don't respect him for a lot of reasons on top of that, but
I think he just got in over his head, honestly.
I mean, yeah, he was pretty ambitious with the Song of Ice and Fire.
And I think this is, believe it or not, so reassessing Game of Thrones, just objectively speaking, the first season is some of the best TV ever to exist. It is a absolutely wonderful adaptation. And the first two seasons are fantastic. However, it really this is kind of a hot take, but I think that it really started going downhill rapidly by season 3. It got a little better season 5 and 6, sort of, but then it took a giant nosedive again. But
I'm sure it's a decent
but the thing
TV.
is, I think it was the creation of the show. Just in hindsight, I think it's the first 2 seasons, like I said, are good, but I don't like the show in hindsight. One of the main reasons is that I think it pretty much killed the possibility of Martin actually finishing his series, and it just deviated so much, and it's become something that it was never really intended to be.
It's
I
a
mean, I
beast of its
guess.
own.
Well, you can go and say whatever you like about the show, but keep in mind, in the end, it's basically just a TV show for a Redditor's version of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, that is true.
Interesting.
Which
Wh-
to me,
wh-
you can go and make it one of the best adaptations for it, but it's still crap because the source material is not that good.
Mhm. I mean, it's good. Like, it's good to people that have very, let me just say, low taste, low tier taste. But also like Sean Bean as well. Like, he can't survive one movie at all, and he can't survive one season of a show either. I love that
Dude
about Sean
can't catch
Bean.
a break. He's literally just like Hollywood's punching bag for dying.
We need like a guy that can conveniently die. That's very killable. Let's get Sean Bean.
Dude got typecast as the guy who fucking died.
He even died like in a 007 movie as well, and it's like in an insanely
Well,
gruesome
yeah,
way.
I mean, he got impaled by a satellite dish.
Yeah, it's like, how cruel do you have to be?
Dude just makes more and more inventive ways to kill someone.
Mm-hmm.
Like taking a archery battalion's worth of arrows to the chest,
Mm-hmm.
So
which
what's
is how
the-
Boromir died in the books.
Yeah.
So one more thing I want to talk about before we put the rest of the conversation on hold. But are there any non-monarchies or I'm trying to think, or just traditional forms of government in Middle Earth? I mean, I don't know whether the elves could be considered a monarchy in the same way.
I
as
mean,
Europe,
you
but-
might be able to have that with the Variags of Khand, but we don't really know anything about them other than the fact that they rode in chariots and fucked up Gondor.
Yeah.
like the Aryans, maybe.
I don't.
I mean, the Varyags
Aryan
are
invasion?
based a little bit more off of like steppe nomads. There's also like some of the other Easterlings, but again, we don't know anything about them, so that's all just inference. But I mean,
Mhm.
all of the like forces of good are monarchies.
Almost like a monarchy is the natural order.
So I
The
wanna say-
closest you would get
we
to
should just go
not having-
you guys know. So
Wait.
Esgaroth.
Wait.
Which is shown right there.
Esgaroth
It's-
is technically a merchant.
It's a merchant republic,
state.
and that's how it's. And I think Esgaroth, how it's described, and it's that part of the Hobbit again, where the dwarves and build just the company when they arrive there. That entire sequence of events. That's really where Tolkien's anti-capitalism shines the most, because he's essentially criticizing a sort of a capitalist like Republican-run city-state.
Mhm.
No,
Which,
so I mean, when you really look at Tolkien's views on capitalism, yeah, even as a capitalist, I think that they're fully justified. I don't think that the system I prefer is perfect.
and then you get me like the literal feudalist here.
Middle Earth.
I mean, my only problem with feudalism
Middle Earth
is
isn't
it
particularly
doesn't really.
feudalistic, though. That's not really the best way to describe it. I don't think.
Well, I'm not saying that Middle Earth is necessarily feudalistic, although in a lot of ways it still does incorporate the feudalistic ideal. So,
Yeah.
I mean, but also feudalism is a form. It's one of many forms of traditional ways of living that has been known to humanity throughout most of human history. Like there's.
No, continue. Sorry.
Oh, I'm just saying, like, Europe technically developed the word feudalism to describe its structure, but you can see like very similar ways of living in like Japan, China, India, the Arab countries, you typically always had a warrior aristocracy, a
Yeah.
priestly caste, a merchant caste, and the peasantry. That has always
And it
been a
usually is at the
norm.
start of like a civilization when that is the case.
Well, typically, like at the start, like almost everybody has to be a warrior
Mhm.
hunter.
Yeah.
But then as civilizations evolve, you get those castes. So every time you have a settled civilization, you have to have those 4 castes.
But then eventually, and I think this is kind of where this is the one area where I do think Karl Marx is absolutely spot on, because, and I think we talked about this last time, or I forget. No, I talked about this with Paleo Angloism on our stream back on Sunday, and it was about how sort of the changing of the ruling class. It starts feudalistic. It starts with the aristocrats, and then you have a revolution of the bourgeois, revolution of the proletariat. And it's very similar almost to Hinduism. His analysis of this, except it's a more materialistic variant of it, where it's with each as society goes on, the like whichever the next lowest class is going to overtake the previous ruling class. I don't think Marx was intentional. He was, of course, not intentional in terms of his the similarities to like the caste system and how that works in mythology. The one exception is actually Marx was a fan of Giambattista Vico. So
Yeah.
I mean, did talk about that, but he talked about it in a more metaphysical and sociological and religious way. But Marx just made a
materialistic.
more materialistic interpretation of it. So I'm not a fan of dialectical materialism or Marx's ideology, but in terms of Marx's analysis on that specific
that historiography of the
Marx is not necessarily inaccurate with some of his historiography. Relating to struggle between different classes.
Yeah, I mean, like I do agree with Marx's analysis of at least that part of historiography on a material level, but as soon as he starts getting into his theory of overthrowing the bourgeois and replacing it with the 4th estate, aka the proletariat, worker and working class, that's where he runs afoul of his own theory. But yeah, I mean, you can kind of say like Tolkien, he doesn't really like take a stance on like, well, who should be controllers of the economy, because I don't think he frankly cared. Like he didn't care about economics from like what I could see, but he did hate capitalism and industry and its destructive tendencies towards the truth, goodness, and beauty of the world.
And that's kind of
I mean, I guess any
C.S.
sort
Lewis
of
in a lot of ways, because C.S. Lewis was very much a subscriber to the to like 19th century style liberalism. And
I guess the one thing that Tolkien is trying to like get into, if there's any sort of allegory at all, is that, well, really all of the economic ideologies suck, because every single one does not take into account how much harm you will actually do to the goodness of the world. Like every single one is horrible.
Yeah. That's quite frankly why I don't care about economics at all. I've never really cared about it because I've never seen it as a way to achieve goodness in the world. It's always it's honestly through spirituality and the spiritual and metaphysical where you actually can create a truly good order. Well, then economics is just material.
And you
I
see,
guess
I mean,
economics, I just pay economics like lip service these days, because I do think that, well, having everyone be able to go and have a decent like living condition would be preferable to not having that, to go and bring out some more goodness in the world, because then there's not as much envy. But then other than that, like, you really have to care more about spiritual matters.
Exactly. And you see, that's why for me, and so I'm essentially like, I mean, I don't like calling myself a libertarian, but I'm definitely in that sort of that range. I just don't really like describing myself by particular labels, but so because I'm a quote unquote libertarian, just for the lack of a better term here, that I am a capitalist. However, the thing that pisses me off about a lot of libertarians, especially like normie libertarians, is how, and I don't want to say worship the free market because it's kind of like a left-wing straw man of libertarians in a lot of ways, but they seem to treat it like it's like perfect, and they're very utopian in their view, in their regard for capitalism. Like, I mean,
my
just
God, yeah, it's like
even like a libertarian who's a realist would should at least be able to understand that it is nowhere near perfect. There are some very bad externalities that capitalism produces. In the long run, the net positives vastly outweigh the net negatives. But I mean, capitalism is not. It should not be venerated as much as some people do. Like, that's why I'm not a big fan of Ayn Rand personally.
yeah, I mean, one way that I've stumped libertarians online before was just simply tell them, what would you do without the Department of Agriculture? Because do you know how terrible agriculture was before that was created? People would starve on a daily basis because the way that they farmed was so nutrient intensive on the environment that it would turn even the most fertile farmland in places like Illinois into essentially a desert within a generation. So like, you need to have some form of control on, well, free matters such as agriculture, or else you're just going to kill everyone with your own negligence.
I mean, like, I tacitly agree, like, tacitly, but that there is that need of that. But, like, back in the day, of course, it was done more by guilds than it was by government departments. But there was this great video released by Morgoth's Review actually today, and I listened to it while I was doing some yard work, and he was talking about how his neighbor literally just grew her own blackberries and made her own blackberry jam and gave him some, and they were so tart, so full of flavor, and they were, because they weren't mass produced by industrial level farming, capitalistic industrial level farming. It was done in her own backyard. It was done like the Hobbits, essentially.
We need to end we need to end this war against unpasteurized milk.
We really need to go and end this war on non-industrialized agriculture. Of course, non-industrialized meaning like agriculture not done by major agricultural conglomerates, and instead just purchase more from local farmers. Because I mean, that helps them have more quality of life because they can afford more necessities such as education. And we'll say what you will on education, even like homeschooling costs quite a bit of money.
Exactly.
I mean, back then though, it's like, if you look at the Shire, it's like you get your education through the stories, through the trades that you're going to learn from your father. Like that's the education that you needed, because you were going to be inheriting that occupation. And that's how it was also in the Middle Ages. And this is why I say, like, the peasant was not dumb in the Middle Ages. The peasant was a very smart man. He knew more about tilling the soil than somebody who goes to a university for 4 years in agriculture.
Even you had like some peasants who were just so shrewd and were really, really good at what they did. And I'm referring to not the serfs, because the serfs, but peasants who actually were able to make it on their own. But you had a lot of them who ended up becoming wealthier than some knights.
Oh yeah, like
I mean, like, but in the Middle Ages, they didn't.
Hanseatic League.
No, I'm talking about even before the rise of the merchants.
I mean, yeah, like, I think in the Holy Roman Empire there were a fair few peasants who were richer than even some of their own lords.
And then the Black Death especially was a major game changer. Like, the rise of the middle class in Europe would not have happened so acutely were it not for the Black Death, which required a massive restructuring of the economy. It led a lot of there were a lot of voids to be filled because so many people died, and so there was just so much innovation in terms of how things how people started handling things. Like they handled things differently economically, and in terms of not industrialization but urbanization kicked off then too, because there were just long story short, I don't know where I'm going with that, but long story short, we had a lot of people who wound up dead, and people took advantage of that gap in the market, the gaps in the market that occurred. And that was very influential in weakening feudalism as not necessarily a socio-political system, of like officially de jure, but as an economic, as a socio-economic system. It pretty much destroyed manorialism, which is the economic component of feudalism.
I mean, yeah, but feudalism like even lived on, like say into 1918.
Yeah, in terms of like the official titles and peerage and that sort of thing. However, but they didn't. Feudalism itself as a system did not.
Well,
have
yeah,
the
as like
kind
a
of
system of
political power,
economics, but
because absolutism completely overtook feudalism, and mercantilism completely overtook the manorial economics.
Like I just say like feudalism still existed into 1918 because the landed aristocracy, even though they weren't like economically as important, they were still culturally and socially an important caste, and they still held their estates from the time of antiquity. Like say I'll use Klaus von Stauffenberg, the guy that tried to kill Hitler. He was a count, and he still held his countly estate in Bavaria, and his family held that since like literally I think it was like the 800s AD. Like he was an ancient aristocratic family, like, and they still mattered greatly in Germany, even into Funny Mustache Man's regime, and it couldn't be denied. That's why I say like feudalism could be like primordially eternal, even if they're economically, it's not the system that governs it. The social structure of feudalism could still live on past the economic portion of it.
Yeah. That's fair, but it still loses power, similar to how kings and lords, like they lost their political power. Because yeah, they're still technically in charge. They have that. And I'm referring specifically to absolutism now. Absolutism greatly lost its power, and even though you still have the kings and the monarchs, because you saw the rise of the middle class, specifically in the late 18th, early 19th century, then the aristocracy then just could not wield the same amount of power that they had, so they had to adapt, and they had to court the support of these very, very wealthy elites. And you saw something very similar around the time of the decline of feudalism, prior to absolutism coming around, where they had to, like the kings, they had to rely on the merchants as well for certain like coalitions and alliances, because many of them were wealthier than the kings, or had like the free merchant towns had higher GDPs than entire feudal kingdoms. By that
I mean, I'm just going to say also like it wasn't solely economic. Like also was the rise of more managerial systems of government, more bureaucracies and manager systems over the old aristocratic principle, which was the honor-based system of governance between families and warrior aristocrats. Like chivalry, like the reason why I admire it is fundamentally the system of governance by honor and valor, not by managers and bureaucrats.
I think good. And so this is
sort which I think
we're still generally sticking to the theme of Tolkien, because this entire thing does pertain to it. But with regards to the criticism of modernity and sort of just the decline of the sort of ideal pastoral state, I'm going to play at least part of a video right now. It goes back to, it's based on Spengler's theory, but just forget about Spengler during this specific segment, and just think about it within the context of Middle Earth moving from the second to the third age. Because I don't know, last time I watched it, that is actually something that came to mind, and I did start doing research on Tolkien and just the themes of decline. But hold on a second. I'll keep saying what you were just saying. Sorry, while I find it.
I mean, I was just saying that I think like Tolkien was he hated managerial systems of government, and he preferred the more honor-based, chivalric orders of governance that used to dominate society prior to the industrial age and the absolutist age of governance.
Yeah. I mean, because even the monarchies and just like the kings and the kingships in Lord of the Rings, they're not really absolute monarchies in the same way as like 17th and 18th century dynastic states in Western Europe were.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't really, and it wasn't even necessarily feudalistic either. In many ways, they more so resembled how like the kings in ancient mythology were, as opposed to actual historical monarchies.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think he also loved like the
benevolent despotisms. Maybe that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I think he also admired like the Carlylean great man of history and the man of action. Like that's what you see, like especially in Theoden. He's very much the great man and the man of action in the scene. He always has initiative. He always has the final say. He carries the room with him. Same with Aragorn. But definitely Theoden is like the archetypical king, the one that will charge in front of his troops into battle, and lead his men in the charge, like during the Ride of the Rohirrim.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to say, on that note, just to bring it back to the Amazon's Rings of Power, this is immediately, like after I started seeing the information that was coming out about it and just how it just wasn't fundamentally Tolkien. And I've heard some people like it. I've heard, one of the things I've heard was that if it weren't Lord of the Rings, it would be a decent, like an above decent fantasy show. And I have absolutely no reason to doubt that that is the case. But it's just the fact that it has the Lord of the Rings name that it just completely, by default, just makes it like not good. But anyway, what I was saying was when I first started seeing everything that was coming out about it, and that the show was going to turn out to be a worst case scenario, this is exactly what popped into my head. But where now are the horse and the rider? Where is the horn that was blowing? Where is the helm and the hauberk and the bright hair flowing? Where is the harp on the harp string and the red fire glowing? Where is the spring and the harvest and the tall corn growing? They have passed like rain on the mountain, like wind in the meadow. The days have gone down in the west behind the hills into shadow. Who shall gather the smoke of the dead wood burning, or behold the flowing years from the sea returning? How has it come to this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that speech by Theoden.
Yeah,
because it's very telling of. I mean, I think he has a melancholic soul, definitely. Theoden.
I mean, Theoden lost. He had a very difficult
reign.
Very difficult reign. Like he was very beloved, but he also pretty much lost even though he was still the king, he pretty much lost everything. Like the only one he really had was like by the end was Éowyn. Like
mm-hmm. I mean, technically also his nephew. That didn't his nephew inherit his kingdom?
Yeah, Éomer.
Éomer actually became one of the best kings as well.
Mm-hmm.
What? Yeah, Theoden was. It's because, and this is why I talk about how the Lord of the Rings is about the restoration of the natural social order. I'm not even going to use the word political in this sense because that's just such a materialistic term in terms of like the connotations, especially in the modern sense, but the restoration of the social order, not necessarily to perfection, but to something that is inherently good. Just on a fundamental level, something that is as pure as like a man-run society could be. And you see that with Aragorn and you see that with Éomer, because they ultimately ended up becoming like the greatest king in many, many, many generations. Aragorn surpassing even many of the previous Númenóreans, and then also Theoden, who was a fantastic king. Éomer was an even greater king than Theoden was.
Yeah, I think actually by the end of Aragorn's reign, one of the few things that Tolkien discussed about him was that he restored both Gondor and Arnor to their greatest possible border extents. Like Gondor, by the time he died, even bordered Rhûn and Erebor. And that's saying something.
Did Gondor end up conquering Mordor again?
It vassalized the tribes in Mordor.
The human tribes, yeah.
Yeah, because there are human tribes around the big lake in Mordor, and well, they never really wanted to follow Sauron. They were just enslaved by him.
And the interesting thing about Mordor too is just as an ecosystem, there are like okay, you take a look at how it is in Peter Jackson's films, and I know like the sort of hell symbolism that they were going for, but that's only a very specific part of Mordor. Because it has a very diverse ecosystem.
I mean, the part of Mordor that really, frankly, matters is around Mount Doom and the Black Gate area. And yeah, those are just literal hell. The rest of it is essentially an ash plain that you might find in Iceland, in the newest parts of Iceland, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was also the hold on a second.
But I mean, still, like even an ash plain, you can't really live on an ash plain.
But that's not all of Mordor. That's specifically.
No, that is the most habitable parts of Mordor are still ash plains. Just with the lake.
Not Nirn.
Yeah,
Nirn was a breadbasket.
Not really. A breadbasket in the way that you could grow some hardy crops there, but nowhere near to the point of being a breadbasket like you could actually feed the people living there.
I mean,
they were half starving to death all the time.
I mean, Nirn was at the heart of the. It was one of the most important parts in Mordor, at least in terms of supplying, or for logistical purposes and for food for the humans who fought for Sauron and for the orcs as well.
No, I think the humans mostly grew like their own food outside of Mordor for a reason.
I'm talking about the orcs that were stationed in Mordor, though. Before this is prior to the War of the Ring. I'm talking about within the 100 years leading up to it, when Sauron is still rebuilding his strength.
I really should actually try to find my Atlas of Middle-earth real quick for you to go and be able to reference that. I also really should stop piling my books in one massive pile on my desk.
Oh god,
this is not helping.
I'm also doing that right now, but that's because I'm writing a pretty in-depth final essay for a political science class where I'm advocating for Ghibellinism, which is essentially the Holy Roman Empire.
Nice. What type of political science class are you in?
Oh, it's just a 101. It's just an intro.
Fair enough.
But the professor
I remember
said,
those days.
Yeah, the professor said, "Oh, write your utopia," and I said, "Well, Ghibellinism."
You asked for it.
Yeah, you asked for it.
Well, I have it right here. The what was it, one Tolkien Gateway or one wiki to rule it, whatever.
Yeah, don't use that.
Don't use this. Okay, I don't know what's better.
I mean, Tolkien Gateway is okay, I guess, but if you have the Atlas of Middle-earth, just use that because it also has every single map that you would possibly need.
Not all of us own the Atlas of Middle-earth.
You should buy it then. It's like $40.
I should. No, I should. I really should. But
Yeah,
no, see, Nirn was
I've
Nirn
I've
was not in the
limited
north of
bookshelf.
Mordor. It was south. Okay, I got them mixed up. Yeah, no. So North Mordor, northwestern Mordor was where the Black Gate was, and then sort of not central Mordor, but just a little more to the southeast of there was where Barad-dûr was, and Mount Doom right across from there. But all the way in the southeastern section was Nirn, which was it was again right here. Hold on, where's the source that it's citing? Which was northwest.
I mean,
Regional
Yeah, I
map.
know what Nirn is.
Atlas of Middle Earth. Yeah, Atlas of Middle Earth right here.
Yep.
That's what it's citing. So yeah, no, it was made to feed Sauron's armies.
Hmm.
That's what he used
I
it
mean,
for.
it's also saying a semi-arid place. Like technically, places like Montana are considered semi-arid, so it could
Yeah,
be.
I mean, Montana, you could live there, but you need to be really hardy to live there.
I mean, I live here technically, but
If anything,
yeah.
it almost looks like I'd say
it could
so.
it
I'd
could
say
pa-
east
it could
central
pass as
Colorado almost like the Boulder area. It kind of looks like the region of Colorado, like where Boulder is.
Yeah.
I say it looks like the area kind of east of Bozeman, Montana, like east of the mountain pass there of Bozeman.
Yeah.
That's kind of what the terrain looks like. Also, like between Bozeman and Butte, also looks like that in Montana. Like I'm
Kind of like the
referencing
place between the mountains and the plains, that sort of middle area.
Yeah, where you still see the mountains, like they're still technically surrounding you, but it's like it's the lands between the prairies where you still have a lot of farming and ranching. If you drive I-90 through Montana, you'll know what I'm talking about. You'll see terrain like this, except for it'll be more brown than it will be green, like in this picture.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful drive though, and like if you have an audiobook in the car, like that's the best way to pass the time.
Yeah, I mean,
'Cause
I remember doing road trips to Montana when I was younger, but we would only go as far west as like Livingston.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I would literally go from like North Dakota all the way to Washington. Now I'm living in Montana, so every time you need to go somewhere in this state, you're going like 4 or 5 hours.
Yep. That's where I'm planning to move.
How isolated do you want to be from other people in Montana?
Pretty darn isolated, actually.
Then do you want to be in the mountains? Next question, or not, or do you not care?
Really, where I can actually afford to live, but again, I'm also going to be working in like HVAC repairs, so my budget's going to be pretty good.
I mean, like eastern Montana is like the most the least densely populated part of the state. Like everywhere east of Billings, like there's virtually no people. If you really hate
but aren't
people.
those also like mainly reservation land as well?
No. That is actually mostly just like farmland and small towns. But there are reservations over there, mostly in the eastern part of the state, but like along like I-90, it's just
Could have sworn that there was a large reservation right next to the Little Bighorn battlefield.
Yeah, there is, but that's of course going south of I-90. Like you're like that's in the southeastern, like south, like a central eastern past Billings is like what I'm referring to.
Okay.
Yeah, essentially the lands around I-90.
I think a better sort of, I guess, parallel, and even geographically works as well. Hold on a second. So I'm going to show you guys some. I'm going to put these pictures up for a second, and
yeah, Colorado and
no, it's not Colorado.
Wyoming.
No, I'm just saying it's geographic. This is actually the geography near where Mordor would be if you were to overlay a map of Middle Earth over Europe.
Well, sure. I guess the area of Mordor that also borders Khand.
Oh wait, is this where's this at in Europe?
Turkey.
Turkey. Yeah.
That's kind of what I picture as southern Mordor being like Turkey.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can see that. Or like probably Bulgaria, you could extend that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, we can go we could probably like do 2 more of these streams, honestly. Like Tolkien is
Easily,
very
yeah.
easily. I mean, also if we want to do like a stream on the Hobbit at some point in time. But
You know, we
Middle
should
Earth in
actually
general.
like next stream. I would recommend that everyone at least read a little bit of the Silmarillion or listen to it, so then we
Yeah.
can talk about the first age. Like, if you want to go into the politics of Middle Earth, you need to talk about the first age because that's where most of the politics is actually more fleshed out.
Yes.
mhm.
Exactly.
Like, then you'll
I
get
mean-
into things like kinslayings.
Yeah.
One of Tolkien's, I think his most underrated book, because I remember I read it in a day when I was like 12. What was The Children of Hurin?
The Tale of Beren and Luthien is my favorite.
Actually haven't read Beren and Luthien. I mean, I know the story. I've read the part of the Silmarillion of their story, but The Children of Hurin, it was edited by Christopher Tolkien, but I think it is a fantastic, based off of his notes, of course, but I think it is a absolutely fantastic story, and the very sad, also very. It's a lot like a Greek tragedy in a lot of respects, and
Isn't
it gets
the Children of Hurin also where like Turin?
it gets a little screwed up towards the end.
Yeah, it's Turin, isn't it?
What?
Hmm.
Well, Turin.
It's about it's about Turin and his sister.
I heard
And
Turin
I
killed
won't
himself,
get
right?
into
He
more
threw
about
himself on
that.
his sword.
Huh?
Didn't Turin threw himself on his sword at the end, right?
Yes, the sword that also like killed his best friend.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And then what happened to
Killed,
what
like,
happened to
every
the other?
single
What
person
happened
who
to
ever was
Turin's
nice
older
to him.
sister? Because Turin had an older sister, or did he have an
No.
older sister or a twin? Also, I forget.
No, he didn't have either.
No, because because I know Turin had 2 sisters.
No, he had one.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Hold on.
But just to finish up my point, like since we mostly covered like the Fellowship was a big part of this stream, maybe in the next stream we should all read the Two Towers and come to that stream with that mentality of more discussing that book, and then we can do like a third stream that's more themed around the Return of the King.
I would also like to request that we don't do these streams at midnight.
Yes, this is like
Because for the love of God, Politicrat, I need to sleep.
that, and also like we're working on like tired brains where you've already been up
We
for
are.
several hours.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, by the way,
poor
okay.
Paleo Angloism was on this at like 4 a.m. his time.
Yeah, exactly.
So actually,
Like, if you're gonna do a stream, do it at like 3
There was a
p.m.
third. There was another daughter. Erwin.
Really?
Erwin, second child of Hurin and Morwen, sister of Turin and Ninor. She died when she was 3.
Second child of who?
Of Turin. And then was killed.
So-
and then was killed in Angband. After yeah.
You said Turin.
Turin.
Are you sure you're not talking about Turin? His
Turin's
father?
children were Turin, Ninor, and Erwin.
Who the hell?
Never mind. We are on tired brains.
Yes. But yeah,
So-
I would say probably also during the weekend, next weekend at the soonest, we should do a Two Towers focus stream, and we should all attempt to read it in a week. I think we could all probably feasibly do that or audiobook it.
Okay. Yeah.
That's my proposal.
So real quick, to close out, we are going to watch a very, very quick video.
What?
He called him a
Yeah.
cunt and just walked away.
Yeah, I know, but it just like that.
Me on Twitter.
Because it was but you heard what the voice was. It was Billy Butcher from The Boys saying cunt.
Oh,
It's the same
okay.
actor. As
Yeah.
Ant-Man.
Yeah, it is. I've never actually watched The Boys. I only like the memes from it.
It's a pretty solid show.
I've never even heard of it.
Really?
It's like the anti like
Anti-Marvel.
yeah, and the anti Marvel.
Either way, on that note,
So it's good.
yes, legitimately, it's probably one of the legitimately like great shows on television today. I don't know for how much longer, because I mean, you know how shows decline over time, but it has been consistently good. But either way, on that note, thank you for coming on. Sorry about the delay and late, and sorry for being a little disorganized. I should have expected that we were probably going to end up having a follow-up stream. I intuitively, I kind of got that sense that was going to be the case. But either way, if do you guys have any final thoughts?
Yeah,
Nope.
please don't have me stay awake until 1:38 in the morning for a live stream again, please.
Oh yeah, sure, no problem. Okay, Kilhoon.
I mean, just gonna shill my channel. I hope to make new content, but I've been really busy with life. So
Yeah, as we all are. Okay, so on that note, thank you for coming on, you guys, and everyone else who's already left, and also everyone who tuned in. And we will pick this up next time, whenever that might be. Have a good evening, everybody, or morning in this case.